Welcome to the Brothers Chamber Show. This is Gettin, Saucy with Natalie. We're at show number 5 today. Today we're going to be cooking an ode to a Midwestern classic, the pot pie. So we're going to do 2 variations. One is the old-fashioned chicken pot pie, and then the other one will be a vegetarian pot pie made with only vegetables. So to get started, first we're going to make the crust, which in all sincerity should have been made already, but I figured you guys might want to know a quick and easy pie crust. So here it is. So right here in my food processor, I have 3 cups of all-purpose flour. Right here I have some salt that I ground up because I don't have a salt grinder, so I do it by hand. So I just add a couple of pinches of salt. It's probably, I don't know, maybe about half a teaspoon worth, even up to a teaspoon, honestly. It just depends on how salty you like your crust. But I will say don't skimp on the salt because then you really lose that buttery flavor in the pie crust. But I always bake with unsalted butter, so I like to add my own salt. So we've got the flour, we've got the salt. Now this is some butter. This is 10.5 ounces of butter, which is roughly about 2.5 sticks of butter. I like to cut mine up very thinly, and then I put it in the freezer to try to get it as cold as possible. Whenever you're making any sort of pie crust or any sort of pastry, you want the fat that you're using to be as cold as possible because when it stays cold it maintains its form and it doesn't melt in. When it melts into the flour while you're forming your pastry dough, that's when you end up with kind of a crumbly and not flaky dough. In order for it to be flaky, it needs to maintain the integrity and not melt. So I put all this together and then I'm just gonna mix it all together really quickly with the food processor. Now you can do this by hand. You don't have to use a food processor. For the longest time I've actually done it by hand. I don't know, I find it therapeutic to kind of just mix in the butter myself, or cut it in rather. But if you're tight for time, or if you just don't feel like getting your arms really tired, then just use a food processor. It's really quick. So I'm just going to pulse it a little bit until it all starts to come together and get kind of crumbly. Now from this stage, I'll show you. At this stage you basically just have flour, and then the butter just ends up being in small little chunks, and that's how you want it to be. So from here, some people like to go ahead and add the water while it's in the food processor and let it come together. I generally like to empty it into a mixing bowl and then add my water and mix it in by hand, because that ensures that it's not overmixed. That gives me a little more control. So I'm going to pour it into this mixing bowl. And then from here, you're going to add some very, very ice cold water into the dough gradually, or into the flour gradually, just until it comes together. So I usually start out with about 2/3 of a cup of ice water, and I add it gradually, and if I don't have to add the whole 2/3, then I don't, and if I have to add a little more, I do. But you really don't want to add too much water when you're doing a pie crust, because once the water mixes with the flour and it starts to form that gluten, that can make for a sort of tough pie crust. So I just sort of I get my fingers, I get them wide, and it's almost like I'm whisking the mixture with my fingers, just until it starts to come together a little bit. There are some recipes I've seen too where if you really want to make sure that your pie crust is very, very flaky, you can do this with vodka instead, because the vodka helps it come together, but then the alcohol evaporates, so you're left with a really flaky pie crust. But generally, in all the times that I've made this, I just use some water. So you can see it starting to come together. It looks kind of shaggy at this point. You might have to add a little bit more water after this to make it come together more. You do this, and again, you just want to kind of press it together with your hand. You don't want to start mixing it in too crazily because you really, as much as possible, want to maintain that integrity of the butter pieces. Got a little more water here. Just add that. I've made a lot of pie crusts in my day, and I will say that it's something that takes a while to get comfortable doing, and even I feel a little rusty sometimes because in my current job I never really get to do a lot of pastry, so it's been kind of a little bit since I've made this pie crust. I feel my muscle memory kicking in, starting to feel like old times again. So you see now it's pretty much together, so I'm going to enlist my other hand finally. Just try to press it all in, get any of those stray pieces. So next is my favorite part. You're going to briefly knead all of this together. So you've got this, and now what I like to do with my pie crust is a technique called glissade. And basically what you're doing is you're smushing or smudging the butter like flat onto the surface so that you end up with these striations of butter going through the crust, and that's what's going to contribute to making it really flaky. So I just kind of, do that with some of it. And the whole time you just want to make sure that you keep it, fairly in one piece. Again, you don't want to overwork it, so I usually just give it a couple good pats and smooths, and then I just form it into the ball that it's going to be. So see, now we've got this lovely little ball of buttery dough. We're going to let it rest for a little bit before we roll it out and continue with our journey to the pot pie. So that's some pie crust in a nutshell. And now we're ready to get started on our fillings. So while our pie crust is resting, we're going to go ahead and crush up the garlic and get the chicken simmering, get our beans simmering so that the fillings are ready to go. So first we're going to crush some garlic in our trusty rusty pilon. So I got my garlic peeled already. I'm going to dump that in there. Add some sea salt, maybe just a little bit like that. I usually just add enough to help the garlic break up, and then I add to taste as I'm cooking. Now I have some peppercorns, assorted peppercorns. I'm going to throw some in there. I don't love my food super peppery, but some people do, so put as much or as little black peppercorn as you want. Alright, so let's make our way over to the couch to crush up our lovely garlic mixture. We're sitting today next to our friend Janet. Story about control. So I've been listening to this album a lot lately. It's been really nice. A little revisit. I just realized in the last 15 minutes that this album came out the same year that I was born, so I think that's good, I guess, especially with my birthday rolling up soon. I'm not going to say how old I'm going to be. Anyways, so I've been listening to our friend Janet and just being really inspired. I especially love the lyric which says, my first name ain't Baby, it's Janet. Miss Jackson if you nasty. It just really hits home with me. So, thank you, Janet, for bringing this music about control and about being a badass into my life. It's inspiring me and getting me through this cold month of February. So we got our garlic going. Just crushing it up. Again, it doesn't have to be super fine, but I want to make sure to, crush it up enough that it's going to impart the flavor and we're not going to get too many huge chunks of garlic. Okay. This garlic crushed up pretty quickly, so I think we're good to go. And see what we have right here. Just a little crushed up garlic mixture. Ready to go into our saute pan and make things a little spicy. Okay, so before we do that, I want to wash my chicken really quickly. This is another Haitian thing. Haitians always wash poultry and seafood with either lemon or sour orange, depending on what you have. I have lemon, and I've got 3 chicken thighs here, chicken legs with the thighs, so I'm just going to use a little lemon wedge, and I just like to wash it in cold water, just give it a rinse. Especially because since our chicken comes pre-packaged now, honestly, you're not there when it gets slaughtered, so you don't know the exact conditions. So Haitians are really big on just giving it a preliminary cleaning with some citrus, because the citrus will help to start to kill any germs that are on there. Just like to, put some cold water, just put my lemon, get all the juice out, and then I'll even take it and kind of rub it onto each individual leg. Just kind of get in there, get a little bit under the skin. This is very Haitian. Like, it's hard for me to imagine ever consuming chicken without it having been cleaned with citrus. So just get it in there, about under the skin. Please excuse my messy sink. This is how real New Yorkers live. Have some dishes from breakfast that will be washed tonight. Alright, so I drained that water, and then I'm going to give it another rinse, just so that it doesn't have too much of the lemon left. I always remember when I first started cooking, I tried to make chicken one time for my family. I wanted to make it just like my mom. And I went and I cleaned the chicken with lemon, but I didn't rinse it. So the lemon was very tart, to say the least. So now I always remember to rinse off the chicken, unless I just want really lemony chicken for whatever reason. I'm gonna give my hands a quick little wash. Okay. Now we're ready to start sauteing some stuff. So I'm gonna do the vegetarian pot pie filling and the chicken pot pie filling simultaneously. So for the vegetarian one, I'm just gonna do mung beans, which I have here. They've been soaking for a little bit. Mung beans cook pretty quickly, so you don't have to soak them. I wanted to soak them ahead of time just because I knew I wanted to move things along and not make you guys wait too long for your... Okay, we got our fires going. Woo! Alright. So... for each one, I'm going to start with sauteing in, this is a mixture that I did of olive oil, sunflower oil, and grapeseed oil. So I'm going to do a lot of my sauteing with this, and then I like to finish my dishes with butter, more so than sauteing with butter. So give a little of that in each pan. Keep that handy for the next time we need to use it. So first I'm going to start out, once this heats up a little bit, I'm just going to saute my onion, my carrot, and then my mung beans. I'm going to saute that. So we'll add some onion first. This isn't really quite heated up yet, but we'll add it in this one. Let it get going. Take a second to heat. And I'm also going to add my garlic in there. Now normally chicken pot pie would have celery, but I mean you can really do any variation you want. And today's variation will not include celery because I forgot to pick it up at the store. So that's my bad. But if you want to include celery, by all means, chop up a few ribs of celery and add that into your saute as well. Toss the garlic in there. Slowly heating up. This is a thinner pot, so it's heating up very quickly. You can see our garlic in there with our onion. Starting to sweat really nicely. Break up this garlic. Now we're starting to get a little heat. This really should have been preheated a little more since it's thicker, it's cast iron. But I was just so excited to get started, I couldn't help myself. So that's alright. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and add the mung beans in to get those cooking for our vegetarian one. A lot of times I like to saute my beans when I'm cooking them I saute them with the aromatics before I add the water, just because I think it helps to impart more flavor. So, you know, it's up to you. Some people prefer to add water, bring it to boil, and then add their beans, but I kind of like to saute them a bit. You know, switch it up. So we got that going. Got this coming along. Really starting to get some sizzling. So I'm also going to go ahead and add carrots to both of these. So we got carrots in there, carrots in there, lots of colors going on. Now I'm not going to let the carrots for the vegetarian one, I'm not going to let them go for too long because I don't want them to get really soft. I don't want them to overcook because they're going to be simmering with this chicken for a little bit. You know, I'm doing this bone-in chicken thigh, so I want to make sure that they don't get too soft and mushy. So I'm adding a little bit of my garlic mixture. It's kind of thinned out with water because I forgot to save some of it, but I'm adding some of my garlic mixture into the chicken. I'm also going to add a little bit more salt, another pinch, so the chicken can start getting some flavor. Maybe I'll add a dash of paprika too, why not? I've been cooking with more and more paprika, and I find it really helps just to impart some subtle flavor, you know, no heat, but it's a nice little flavoring agent. So, kind of got these, a little bit of flavoring on them. And then I'm going to add them here to our onion and carrot mixture. I'm going to do it skin side down. I like to get a nice color on the skin. Add those juices. Got that going on. Alright, so this is browning very nicely. Lots of caramelization going on. Don't be afraid if you start to see dark brown on the bottom. Although it might be 2 seconds away from burning, color means flavor. That's caramelization going on. You want caramelization. You want that flavor. You want the Maillard reaction. So you see, and then you add, you add water or whatever you want to deglaze it with, and you just get like a nice, it starts to create a sauce. So I'm going to have to add much more water than that, but for now, let's start with that. I'm going to add my potatoes later in the cooking process also, so that they also do not overcook. So I'm thinking today for this vegetarian one, it's going to be mung bean, carrot, onion. I'm going to add some dried porcini mushrooms that have been sitting on my shelf, and probably some tempeh. I've got some tempeh that needs to be used. So make a nice hearty little filling. I think it should be good. We'll see. Generally, when I'm cooking beans also, I've been told over the years that it's better to add salt later on to taste because it can make them tough. I don't know if that's an old wives' tale or if that is true. I need to do more research, but just to err on the side of caution, I usually do not salt my beans too much during the cooking process. So we started to get a little bit of color on our chicken legs here. And I think from this point I'm going to go ahead and add water to these as well. So take the bowl that had them before and we're going to let it simmer away for a little bit, each one. And then when they're ready, all we'll have to do is put them in a little pie tin, roll out the crust, and bake them. So it's really a straightforward recipe. I mean, and again, if you have a lot of this stuff done ahead of time, like had I done my crust ahead of time, then it would have been even simpler. Like literally just making whatever filling you want and rolling out some pie crust to make the pot pie. Now the pie crust also freezes really well, so I mean the amount that you get from the recipe I told you, the 3 cups of flour and 2.5 sticks of butter, it makes enough to make, I think, maybe even 2 double pie crust pies. Like, it's a lot. It's a restaurant size, the recipe. So whenever I make it, I usually cut it in half and I save one of the halves just for a rainy day if I'm, I don't know, going to a party and I want to bring a pie, or if I just decide I'm in the mood for quiche or whatever, then I have it in my freezer. You can just take it out the night before and let it thaw in the fridge, and it'll be good to go the next day, ready to roll out. If you keep it in the fridge too long, it'll start to oxidize. So if you know that you want to save it, I would recommend just putting it directly in the freezer. If you don't really want that oxidation. I mean, it's not going to kill you, but it's just going to look ugly. You're going to have like brown crust, which is not very fun. So I'm going to add another sprinkling of salt because I've learned the hard way that if you don't salt enough when you're braising or boiling meats like this, the end product is not, it's not great. It's difficult to season meats once they're already cooked because the salt, all of those flavors get locked in while they're cooking. So, you know, once you've got this chicken, if it's not really seasoned well, you're just going to be flavoring the sauce. You're not really going to be flavoring the chicken much. Let's see, why don't we also add a little piece of kombu to our beans? I think I've said before I like to add kombu when I'm making beans for the minerals, and also because it helps to cook the beans a little more quickly, to tenderize them, and to break up all those, the phytic acid, to help get rid of that so that it's a little more digestible. So just a little piece, just to help it move along. You know, once they've reduced a little, once these beans have started to get a little tender, once the chicken has gotten to a medium doneness, then we'll add our potatoes and we'll add our peas. And then we'll just continue simmering until we have a nice sauce, and we're on our way. So, okay, so our chicken has been going for a while now, and I decided to pull it out of the sauce. The sauce is still simmering. Pulled the chicken out, I let it cool just a tad. So now we're just gonna take the meat off the bone. Since it's been cooking for a while, it really it kind of just comes right off. It's a little hot, so I'm gonna use a fork to help me, but see, it just kind of falls right off the bone. It's pretty easy when you're, you know, braising or boiling chicken because it cooks so quickly. It's just like, it comes right off. And it even comes in nice chunks, so you don't have to spend a lot of time cutting it up afterwards. It's just, you know, get that meat off the bone, and then you're ready to add it to your sauce that's bubbling away, just screaming, I want to be made into a pot pie. So, got that. So I kind of cheated. Normally with pot pie recipes, a lot of the ones that I've seen, you get like chicken breast or whatever cut of chicken you want to use, and then you also use chicken broth. But I wanted to show an easier and cheaper way, I think. So since I got these bone-in chicken legs, the bone, since it's cooking on the bone, it imparts so much more flavor to the broth or to the sauce. So it's like you have a broth. It's just being made while it's cooking, which I think is kind of neat. I leave the skin on. I think the skin is also a really important and very flavorful part of the chicken. So I'm not afraid of a little chicken skin. Like, I'm not saying that that's what I eat all day, every day, but I'm not afraid of including it in my cooking because I really think that the extra fat and the extra flavor that it adds makes a huge difference. You know, if I'm gonna cook, I do it all the way. I'm not really a low-fat, skinless kind of gal. I like the flavor. Again, it'd be easier if it had time to cool off a little bit more, but I know you guys are hungry and you want to see the finished product, so I don't mind burning my fingers a little bit to get this pie going. I'm going to give them just a really rough chop to this meat because I like for it to still have all those chunks in there. Let's just give it a nice rough chop. Keeping your fingers out of the way because it's really not fun to have finger puffs. Take some handfuls of meat and just add them to this broth sauce type deal that's been simmering. Now we want to go ahead and also add our potatoes that have been waiting so patiently. So we got some potatoes for this guy, and we got some potatoes for the veg one as well. The potatoes don't take as long to cook, so that's why I like to add them closer to the end. So I'm just going to give us a little more heat for this to start going. I also took the liberty of adding a little pinch of thyme, because I had forgotten that before, and I think that's a nice thing to add to both of them. I'm just a thyme fanatic, and it's a great thing to include this time of year with all the cold and flu going around. So I added some dried thyme, and I think for the chicken one I'm also going to add just a touch of nutmeg, because I think that's just kind of helps to, I don't know, not brighten it. Really, it kind of helps to ground some of these flavors, and it always goes nicely with any sort of a creamy, savory dish. It just kind of works. And it also helps you digest it. Nutmeg's really good for digestion, so why not? We'll put a little shave of nutmeg in there. This is what Haitians use to grate their nutmeg. We call it a grage. So you just take your grage and your nutmeg, put a little fresh nutmeg. And just a touch. You don't want this to taste like a dessert. Just to add a nice subtle note, a little subtle spice. So next we need to roll out our pie crust really quickly while these are in their final stages of cooking. We're going to go ahead and collect our puff pastry stuff from the fridge and roll it out. So I'm going to put a lid on this so it'll cook a little more quickly. I get a lid on this one, which is actually just a saute pan because I don't have a matching lid. And I'm going to grab the pie dough that we so lovingly made not too long ago. We're going to roll it out. Yeah, we're going to dust it with some flour because I really don't like when my pastry dough sticks. Get that all spread out. And we're just going to use half of this. And it's a lot of pie crust, or pie dough rather, so I'm going to take half of it. It's alright, there's still chicken on my knife. It's alright, it's going to be chicken pot pie. So we're in the final stages of our pot pie fillings, and I just added a tiny bit of beurre manière, which is basically a French method for thickening sauces and stuff like that. It's just butter mixed with flour, equal parts, and you just kind of make it into a paste, and you just plop it in and you mix it in, and you can see I've added some already. It's making it nice and like viscous and thick, and that's the kind of consistency that you want for a pot pie filling. The other one is probably going to use the smaller. And you don't have to use, this doesn't have to be homemade pie crust. I'm just a purist. I like to use homemade pie crust. I like making pie crust. But you can literally just pick up store-bought pie crust or store-bought puff pastry, you know, depending on how flaky you want it, and it'll save you all this trouble. So I've just pulled our pot pies out of the oven. I've got our chicken pot pie here, one of them, and I've got our vegetarian pot pie here. And that's really it. I mean, those were in the oven for maybe about 15 to 20 minutes just to let the pastry crust get kind of brown and golden. And you don't have to use, this doesn't have to be homemade pie crust. I'm just a purist. I like to use homemade pie crust. I like making pie crust. But you can literally just pick up